Okay, we've reached the end of the workshop here. I want to draw your attention to one last section in the worksheet, which is this one here, closing questions. And these are just a couple of questions to help kind of summarize and what we've learned so far in the workshop, and to make sure that all the great work you did can kind of attach to the mental model you have and help you remember it into the future. So I'm going to encourage you to pause the video, answer those, and when you unpause, I'll share with you some closing thoughts before we conclude. Okay, so to finish, I want to reiterate that authentication, honestly, really straightforward. It's just a secret that a device gives with its message to the receiving device, and it's a secret that only it is ever supposed to know. If the receiving device sees that secret, it knows it's talking to an authenticated device. However, as we saw today, the more assumptions that an attacker can break, the more and more complex our code needs to be in order to ensure that that authentication holds true, right? The most basic of which is if the attacker can see the secret that's going in the transmission, well, then that secret stops being a valid form of authentication. And some key ways that we did that were to use the message authentication codes. We disabled the debug port on the badge and the reader so that an attacker didn't have easy access to the binary. We derived keys, we used digital signatures and session keys. But even at the end of the workshop here, in our final exercise, there were some really key assumptions that we were making that sort of, was holding together the security guarantees that we had. We had to make sure that the badge could not have the firmware easily extracted. Even though we limited the blast radius in that case, it would still be very problematic if the attacker had really easy access to that. We assumed that the badge was able to compute its own MACs and verify digital signatures. Some badges don't, and so we wouldn't have been able to have sort of implemented some of our security mechanisms if that weren't the case, if we were forced to use a very low-cost system where the badge didn't have that capability. In the exercise 4 and 5, we had to assume that the badge could generate its own valid nonces, just like the reader was. But if either one of those was not able to generate valid random numbers, then the kind of security principles that we're relying on break down. And a couple more there. I won't waste your time reading them. The last point I want to make is, again, just that there were other considerations also at play in making sure that this is a secure system. So we focused very narrowly on the actual kind of transmission process between badge and reader. How do we authenticate and ultimately encrypt that transmission back and forth? That's to say nothing about how our security enterprise manages the keys, how even we manage the authorizations of a person once we know that they're the ones to present the badge to the reader. How do we check that they have access to the door or, can get into certain parts of the building? So there are definitely other considerations to be made when implementing these security features that might either just need their own attention or maybe mean that you don't need, the level of security in exercise 5. Maybe exercise 2 or 3 works as long as you can justify the additional considerations in the system. The last thing I want to ask of you, if you've got, 1 extra minute to make sure that help me become a better presenter and a better teacher, is follow this QR code. There are 5 or 6 questions there that give you the opportunity to tell me whether this on-demand workshop thing worked for you and what worked well for you and what I can do better to improve the next one. And if you just want to see additional content like this or other topics, then you in workshops like this, then you can answer that in that survey there. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for your time and your attention. I hope you learned something useful and enjoyed it. Happy hacking.